The question that I'd like to ask is, including John Deere and everything else, of course, 10,000 is a lot, but do we have a strike wave? Labor Paul, go.
So I am, and I hope I don't sound like a Debbie Downer, I am slightly cautious with that word. I guess I use the word mini strike wave. Maybe I don't think there is an official definition of what that constitutes.
Paul, thank you so much for joining us today. Really excited to be with you. Paul Prescod, your Twitter is Paul_Prescod. We can try to pull that up here. Paul, Philly public school teacher and union man through and through. Love to see it. You love to see it, especially these days.
I haven't seen my Twitter profile in a while, or actually looked at the homepage, but
yeah. You're not, obsessed with it like me?
Not totally. Although, as you see there, I joined not too long ago, December. Oh, I guess about a year ago. Wow.
Yeah.
But I don't even know what Twitch is, so I'm glad to be on Twitch, even though I don't totally know what it is. But
okay. Well, have you ever been on Twitch Live before? Is this your first?
I think I have on another. I just didn't know I was while I was doing it, but I'm basically an old man at heart. So. Oh my gosh, I totally get it. I was raised by boomers, so I like to say, I'm 25% boomer. It sneaks in there from time to time. So, if you wanted to, if you cared about seeing the live chat, no one's making fun of you or anything. But cool. Yeah, if you wanted to see that, I just sent you a link to the Twitter. You could pull that up on the side. But everyone's really nice here. Otherwise, they get banned. That's pretty much the rule, at least in my chat. Yeah, it's the authoritarian left over here. Right. Yeah, so I've been streaming on Twitch for about a year, talking politics and news. Well, I've been streaming for about a year and a half, talking about politics and news pretty much primarily for the past year. Before I was doing music and other stuff. I'm not sure if you remember, you've been a guest, of course, on Kenzo Shibata's Meet the Left. Yep. That's where we got to meet each other. And it's good to be back with you today. Paul, I invited you because, I saw Maximilian's tweets talking about being super ecstatic about getting out there and getting invested in the labor movement, seeing a lot of new folks getting invested, a lot of new solidarity, taking advantage of all the great labor media out there. And I do try to cover labor every day here on the stream. And a humble request, please show love to the labor journalists of color who hold it down, but almost always get overlooked, and gave a great list. And I'm like, well, that was convenient. And I literally reached out to everyone on the list. You're the first one to bite. Thank you again for being with me today. Paul, what I want to do is give you a moment to give yourself sort of the big shout out, let people know what you do and where they can find you doing those things. And feel free to let us know how we can jump on board and help you as well. Take it away. Yeah, sure. Well, I guess my real day job is as a public school teacher, although this school year I'm actually taking the year off. And that was, it's kind of funny. I don't really look at it as labor journalism. It's kind of just observing, what the kind of work I'm involved in and my involvement in the labor movement. So I've been very active in my union, the Philadelphia Federation of Teachers, over the years. I guess during COVID, got into Jacobin YouTube stuff that they started doing, and we just ran with it, created a Jacobin show. I guess I'm known on those channels as Labor Paul, where I try to do a segment on labor every week. And we try to bring in also guests from the labor movement. I've brought in a few union leaders from Philadelphia that I've worked with, but also others across the country. I think you can find me on Jacobin, both in the magazine, the website. I try to write as frequently as I can for them. And then on YouTube, we are now streaming, I think it's every Wednesdays. We recently changed it up. If you subscribe, you can see us live on Tuesday night when we record. And then, everyone else can catch us on Wednesdays, and we'll have segments up. That's where you can catch me on Labor Paul.
All right, Labor Paul. Stoked again to have you with me today. So I would say probably most people who are watching either live or
maybe watching the YouTube replay of this, they're probably aware of labor actions that are taking place across the country, probably have a basic understanding of the importance of organizing and specifically unionizing. I would guess maybe most don't know, the mechanics of how these movements happen and how these demands that are being made of labor, how those can win and how those can lose, and of course maybe we could talk a little bit more about how even my audience can even support these labor efforts, be it symbolically or materially. We loved this tweet of yours that we pulled up earlier in the stream. As working people, solidarity is how we improve our lives. It's the only tool we have. Of course, you're retweeting Jonah Furman, who's a great labor reporter as well, talking about the John Deere strikers in Ottumwa with the UAW successfully convincing a freight driver not to cross the picket line. You love to see it, Paul.
Yeah. And oh, sorry. Go ahead.
All good. I'm sorry. Well, Paul, I think maybe that could be the context where we can start, and then we could dig in and talk a little bit more about your personal experiences that are happening. But let's draw in our crowd, because we do know about, for instance, Yahtzee. They have a tentative agreement for their contract rights. 60,000, however, authorized their labor leadership to do a strike. We're waiting to hear back from rank and file. I think they're trying to figure out how to vote on it. I'm not actually sure. I'm fully up to date on that, but we're trying to see whether or not the rank and file. How about we start there, Paul? Well, Yahtzee, from where you're standing, does it look like their leadership is selling them out? How do we start this conversation? Where are we going to start?
Yeah, and I guess for background for viewers, first of all, when they take what's called a strike authorization vote, what that means is it doesn't mean they're automatically going out on strike. It's essentially the membership saying we are willing to strike if necessary. I do hesitate. It's hard from the outside to say, kind of judge internally in the union whether someone's quote selling out or not. I do know, and I have a good friend of mine in Philadelphia who works with IATSE, and for the years I've known him, and we work actually closely together in Philly DSA in our labor committee, he was always talking about how his biggest grievance was around, the hours worked and, the really crazy schedules that screw up your sleep rhythms and everything. That was his biggest gripe, more so than, wages and benefits. So from my understanding, this new tentative agreement that they have, the members still need to vote on it. So they came to agreement. If the members voted down, they still have to go back to the table. There could be a strike after that. And some of you might have heard about John Deere workers who are on strike with UAW. And that's actually what happened. The leadership proposed a deal and the rank and file voted it down. So now they're still on strike. So that could happen with IATSE. But, from what I've heard from a friend of mine is that, he wasn't really satisfied with the issues as it related to the schedules. And, there's been a few pretty terrible stories of IATSE workers dying from, driving home extremely late at night, being exhausted from 12, 16-hour shifts. And I think, a lot of us have kind of gotten used to on Netflix, how quickly these seasons come out. We binge watch a show, we just expect the next thing to come out really quickly. But, that comes at a price. And these, the workers behind the scenes are being worked like crazy to make that happen. So the agreement, as I understand it, includes, I think, something like a yearly 3% wage increase, which is my union recently settled a contract like that. It kind of keeps up with cost of living. But again, the biggest thing people were really passionate about was better schedules. There was a slight improvement around giving enough turnaround time for that, but a lot of people are dissatisfied. Now, I truly can't speak to whether I think this agreement will be voted down or not. And I actually don't know the exact timing of when that's going to happen. I'm sure it's going to be very soon where they vote. And that's also the kind of interesting thing that's happening with what we're calling Striketober, is that it's not just these unions going on strike, but it's also this militant move among the membership where it's the leadership is proposing these deals and the membership is voting it down. And honestly, the normal course of things generally is that the leadership recommends a deal, the membership will kind of just go along. But that mood is kind of changing. And, we have seen this throughout history. In the late 60s, early 70s, there was a really great wave of rank and file rebellions similar to this. It was actually way broader than it is right now. So that's the other dynamic of this, is like the membership kind of being out ahead of the leadership and pushing the leadership, further than they might have done otherwise.
All right, Paul. No, that's really everything. That is really everything. I really appreciate you coming in. I'm so happy I reached out. Yes.
Yeah.
I did a good job, Chad.
Can I say something even just broadly?
Please.
We've been in this interesting moment, since the growth of the left, I guess I will roughly date it to 2015, 2016. We've kind of seen this huge growth in groups like DSA, but also like, independent media. And we're kind of in this weird moment where a lot of these mostly younger people like objectively like unions and are for it, but don't know much about them and don't have much experience with them and it's not because they're dumb. It's because, union density is now down to 10%, whereas it used to be at its peak 35%. So it's less and less likely that someone's going to have a brother or a sister or a cousin or a friend who's in a union to know about this stuff. So I think like and that's why I'm very grateful for it's been amazing, especially I'll shout out what Jonah Furman's been doing, like now in the mainstream news, like bringing him on. And I think we've just forgotten about labor for so long, both on the left, but also in the mainstream news. Like it was more common before that each network would have a labor beat journalist. It was something you had to contend with. And now it's like they've forgotten how to do that. They're bringing in people like Jonah. Jonah works for a wonderful organization called Labor Notes, which if you go to labornotes.org, they are a magazine, but also like an institution. They hold conferences. We're actually building up a conference in Philadelphia in December, bringing together unionists to workshop skills and ideas. Yep, there's Labor Notes right there. So it's really nice to see this stuff getting in the mainstream. And, I think what is special about labor for the left partly is again, this is how we fight capitalism. Ultimately, this is what they care about, is their profits, their labor. And this is the source of shutting that down, of really hitting them where it hurts. But also, I think the method of organizing is very important. And going back to that tweet that I had about solidarity and like what that really means. What I like about labor organizing is you cannot be self-selective in the organizing. So what I mean by that is, capitalism throws people together in workplaces. Like in most cases, you don't get to pick and choose who you're working with. And I'm sure anyone who's had a job, you're just thrown in there. Like you meet people, and labor forces you to find, okay, even if I don't like this person, maybe they voted for Trump, maybe they smell whatever. When it comes to the workplace, like we have to find the common interests and work together. So it forces you to do that. Whereas if you're saying, I'm choosing to join this socialist organization, which is nothing wrong with that. I'm a member of a socialist group, but it's like you are kind of self-selecting who you're organizing with, right? Labor, you don't have that luxury, but it forces you, I think, to be a better organizer. And it forces you to not cancel people or whatever, or write people off. Whereas, you got to be like, well, if we don't unite, we're not going to win. So I'm going to have to find every tool. But luckily it is kind of built in what unites you. What unites you is that you're working, and you both want probably higher wages, better benefits, better treatment, regardless of everything else in your life that might be different. That is what unites you. So that's what I think is very special about labor, maybe as opposed to some other movements where there's kind of not that built-in incentive to try to find the common interests.
That's fascinating, Paul. You touched on 2015, and I wonder if you'd be willing to go down that rabbit hole just a little bit, before I ask you a little bit more about John Deere. But what would you attribute to that shift in 2015?
Well, it's funny. As someone that before these years was not necessarily that into electoral politics, I think it really was Bernie. There's no deny. And again, I was someone that I was part of the so-called socialist movement before Bernie, where it was like, oh my God, if we have a meeting with 25 people, that's incredible. That's what it was like in those days. And I saw, I had got involved with DSA during the Bernie campaign and kind of saw how we were growing through that. And I think, as some of you know, the real point actually came with the election of Trump, where there was this huge growth all of a sudden in groups like DSA, like quite literally overnight. that developed from there. But I do think Bernie was the kind of glue. When he ran in 2016, I mean, people like me, I was like, oh, that's cute. He'll get 2% of the vote, whatever. It's not going to matter. But he totally changed politics, and he was saying things that we thought we weren't allowed to say for a long time. And we discovered, wow, this is actually very popular. A lot of people like this. So yeah, I think him running and that what that did was a game changer. And I think again in 2020 was reinforced, and then we've seen these other electoral figures grow. It was kind of this weird thing of electoral politics actually helping to stimulate a movement, which is actually not how it usually happens. I think it's kind of usually should go in the reverse. So I think that is kind of what started it. And I think, we've had in these years, there's been a layer of us on the left who have really kind of tried to hunker down in the labor movement to try to make the difference there. And you're seeing kind of the results of that in certain ways, like in certain cities where these strikes are happening. It's DSA members who are coordinating strike support or maybe taking the lead in that union to be leading things like that. But yeah, I do think Bernie was kind of central to how all of this developed these last few years.
When he ran, I'm like, that's my favorite senator.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's the one good guy there. And again, no, I certainly did not think it would take off like it did. But it just shows you how things have changed. We're in a very different moment, and I think, we're still in a very shitty, bad moment generally politically, but he's also shown to have staying power, meaning, 2020, even though the dynamics, of course, were different in the primary, I think he did even better in terms of his reach and popularity. So these politics aren't going away. I don't think that was a blip. This is a very different moment we're working with here. And again, the positive I'm seeing is now there's a greater appreciation of labor. And even there was someone recently announced for Congress in Pennsylvania, and their rhetoric was very heavily labor where it wasn't before. And I think part of that Striketober, and I think so the more that can kind of infect everyone, the better, I think.
Yeah, we're starting to see, I think it was ABC or maybe NBC, just regular old talking heads, sort of getting into the labor solidarity. You could see them getting fired up. It's fascinating.
Right.
Definitely. I'd like to think that's a shift there. Paul, let's ask, do you think we have 10,000 striking for John Deere? And I want to talk about that. We have 10,000 striking for John Deere. I also follow Jonah Furman. He's got a great Substack. I want to ask him one day what that's all about. What is it? It's got a funny name. Something about a bird.
Who gets the bird? Yeah, right.
I have no idea what that means. Anyways, Who Gets the Bird is his Substack. He talks about all of the labor actions, everything that's happening. It's really, truly fascinating to go down that rabbit hole. But the question that I'd like to ask is, including John Deere and everything else, of course, 10,000 is a lot, but do we have a strike wave? Labor Paul, go.
So I am, and I hope I don't sound like a Debbie Downer, I am slightly cautious with that word. Okay. I guess I use the word mini strike wave. And maybe I don't think there is an official definition of what that constitutes. I just think it's helpful to realize, labor has been so defeated for so long. What we're seeing now is very significant, and we should be excited about it, but it's also still a lot smaller than the strike waves we've seen in the past, whether that's in the 70s and 60s. I mean, post World War II, there was actually this massive strike wave, including a few general strikes in a few cities. So I think what we're seeing now is, it is smaller in scale than that, but again, still extremely significant. And again, I think if you compare the last 20 to 30 years, this is extremely significant. So again, maybe I would use the word mini strike wave at best. I don't think, I don't want us to get too far ahead of ourselves. And, we don't know where this can go. I mean, how long will this extend? And, something I was actually wondering ever since COVID began, and all this rhetoric around essential workers and, the pain that so many working people have gone through these last 2 years, I was always wondering, and I talked about this on the Jackman show, are we going to see post-COVID, even though we aren't out of COVID, but, are we going to see post-COVID kind of workers really mobilizing around that sentiment of okay, you've been talking about us, we're essential, we're great. now treat us like we really are. And, that's the danger from the corporations that say essential worker and just give you pizza or whatever. But the danger is you've planted a bug in people's mind to say, like, look, it was the worker that got us through this pandemic. And I think what we are seeing is that it has done something to the mentality to make people say we deserve more. We sacrifice. We are the ones that kept working when society was shut down. And I think that's part of what we're seeing here is like, yes, we demand more. We're also seeing it among non-union workers when we're looking at the number of people that are resigning, who are not just willing to just take whatever job comes to them, even if they're not in a union, but this kind of thing of like, yeah, working people deserve more. We should not just be fighting for scraps all the time. So yeah, it's significant. I'm still cautious to see where it goes, like how much staying power this has. But we did kind of see, if you remember, back in 2018, there was a mini blip, and there was this famous graph going around where it was showing that 2018, I think, was the most number of strikes or most number of workers out on strike since 1983. And if you saw the graph, it was like decline, decline, decline. Then 2018 is a little blip. Those are the years of the, Red for Ed, the teacher strike wave. I know it seems like ancient history, but it's like West Virginia, Arizona, Kentucky. That was a large share of that, but there was also the GM strike with UAW in 2018. And so, that year it kind of seemed like, okay, something might be happening here as well. It wasn't, I don't think, as spread out as broadly as it is right now, but that was giving me some hope. And now, of course, COVID kind of scrambled the circuits on everything. But I think there was always this prospect that post-COVID, workers are going to try to go on the offensive because of what we had been through. So that was a very long-winded answer of saying I'm going to use the term mini strike wave, and I definitely hope this can grow into to more as things go down the line. I'm also curious to see, because what we've been seeing, these are strikes of unionized workers. So I'm curious to see if this is going to also lead to a growth of more non-union workers organizing into unions, which of course, is really going to have to happen, especially in the private sector. Union density in the private sector is around 6 or 7%, which is like truly catastrophic. Most union members are in the public sector, so people like me, like teachers or things like that. I think I'm wondering if this can be a stimulus to new workers organizing into the labor movement.
Paul, do you mind if I ask? Is this what you were referring to? This I don't know what this is.
I believe so. Yeah, right. Something like that.
That sort of looks promising, right? Line goes up. You like to see it.
Right.
Okay. Well, Paul, I do want to talk about John Deere. Oh my gosh, there's just like so much going on. I don't know.
Right.
And then of course I do want to
I recently went out to Kellogg's strike picket line last weekend or just a few days ago.
I don't know if you're a whiskey drinker. They got the Heaven Hill whiskey makers out there. Yep. But let's talk John Deere, and of course I want to give you plenty of time to talk about your projects, and I want to ask you all about that. If you have any like specific really great anecdotes that you want to throw in at any time, please feel free to just like go any which way you want with this. This is really fascinating, and I think chat's loving it too, right, chat? Okay, good. All right, everyone's being very good in chat. Keep it up. Don't start acting up now. So, John Deere. Back to John Deere. 10,000 of them are on strike. I was looking at Ryan Grimm's analysis the other day. Ryan Grimm describes it as a capital strike, and I wonder what your thoughts are about that. If you'd like, I can even pull up the video. We could watch it together. It's like 8 minutes, but if generally speaking, I could try to tell you what he says if you prefer that.
Yeah, maybe, and I've been meaning to read that article and I haven't. Yeah, if you could maybe summarize what he's meaning by that, the capital strike.
A capital strike. Here it is. I took notes because I'm just trying to learn as much as I can. I feel like I'm going back to college, and I'm doing it for free just via the internet. So here we go. Sort of refers to a capital strike as a fruitful investment opportunity. When capital has a fruitful investment opportunity, but rejects it for a broader political goal. They don't need workers. They need workers, of course. We know this. They need workers and have capital, but they don't want to empower workers and reset the relationship between employer and employees. So the argument is it's not labor that's on strike effectively, although they are.
Right.
It's capital that's withholding, and they're doing it because they know that it'll give up the game.
Right.
In the midst of 4.3 million workers also quitting their jobs, Ryan Wood, I think, argues that capital is sort of playing a weak hand strongly, and Ryan mentions that gig work sort of weakens capital's hand by giving workers sort of a way out. Yeah. I wonder what your thoughts are about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is important to think about how capital acts politically. And so, like, as people on the left, is like, yeah, they care about profit the most. That's what it's about. And I would say yes and no. And to tell a story, I mean, the first labor thing I was involved with, I was a student at a university in Philadelphia, and attached to the university, Temple University, is a Temple hospital. And so those nurses were unionized and they went on strike. So I was kind of involved in supporting the strike, and I got to learn a lot about the labor movement through that. And we had seen that the hospital actually had spent more to break the strike than it would have taken to just settle the demands. And so that raises the question: okay, why do that? They're spending their profits more than it would have just taken, and it was actually about power in the long term, and I think even profit in the long term, because they were calculating, if we can break this strike, we'll break the power of the union. And in the long term, this is going to allow us to do what we want and maybe make more money in the long term. And so I think this goes on all the time. And I think especially in these strikes we're seeing, these are not strikes at mom and pop shops. In fact, the vast majority of those are not unionized or would have like 4 or 5 employees. These are strikes at major companies that have been profiting a lot since COVID began. So there's no question that they could afford these demands and still stay in business and all that stuff. So I think a lot of it is, they're saying we could give in now, and then we're going to have to keep giving in from capital's perspective. That is, we don't want to give them hope. We don't want to get their confidence up to keep demanding more. So I think that's a great point. I mean, we should look at these as a capital strike. They have the money to do this. They can invest in their workforce, but they don't want to. They want to make a point, and part of it is like a political point of the balance of power between capital and workers.
All right. I appreciate that, Paul. Real interesting. I meant to ask before about IATSE, if that's how we say it.
Or IATSE, I guess, yeah.
The rank and file, they need to vote. Is it 50%? Is that the idea? If 50% agree with the tentative agreement, they don't go on strike and they got a contract moving forward? What's the percentage? I don't know.
Yeah, usually it is just simple majority. Some unions might have needing like 2/3 majority or something like that. I actually don't know in the case of IATSE. And again, I don't know when that vote is happening. I assume very soon. But this is, another interesting to watch. And like historically, I'm a labor history nerd. I'm a social studies teacher after all. A lot of times the labor movement, it really happens in waves, and it's usually a matter of workers kind of being inspired by each other and seeing what's happening and it building from there. I mean, that's how it happened in the 30s. It was kind of took a few people who went out front, and when they were successful, other workers started to see like, hey, that's working. I want to do that too. I think the same thing in the 60s with the rank and file rebellions I mentioned earlier. And so I'm wondering to what degree that will happen now, because maybe under normal circumstances, if there wasn't all these other strikes going along, maybe it would have been very simple. The IATSE members would just vote for the agreement. But now if they're hearing, oh, wow, John Deere, they rejected it. These other workers rejected it. Who knows what that's going to do to their idea about what they can do. So that's something I'm going to be really interested to see how that could play out.
All right. Well, Paul, let's maybe give you a chance. I wanted to make sure we give you enough of a chance, as much time as you like, honestly, to go into a little bit of depth about any projects that you're working on and willing to talk about, of course. And if you want, we could pull up any kind of media, and we'd love to sort of learn about what you do and how you do it. I understand you're a public school teacher. I used to be a public school teacher. When I met Kenzo Shibata is when the school was shuttering 50 schools in a brazen neoliberal grab. Yeah, that was my first labor action. So I struck with them, walked the picket line and everything. I was a wee boy. I was probably like 25, and I was a lib at the time, and I didn't truly appreciate worker solidarity, not nearly the way that I do now. In when I see labor actions, I get really excited in a way that's sort of new, right? But that's just sort of me working through my lib ideology, I guess is what I'm trying to say, and learn the value of worker solidarity. So let's talk about your experiences. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about that you're working on specifically that you wanted to sort of share? Maybe an anecdote about your labor reporting or anything else?
Well, I mean, kind of what sticks out to me, and this has just been ongoing project for years, is my work, maybe less so about the writing and the journalism, but really like as a activist in the labor movement and in DSA. And I think this crucial task of, trying to bring back a connection between the left and the labor movement. I mean, at one point in history, especially in the 30s and 40s, and even maybe a little to a lesser degree in the 60s, but definitely it's not really existent then, or it's not really existent now, but it was just assumed that the left and the labor movement were really connected. And that's where a lot of the best organizers within the labor movement were of the left. And that connection has been really severed for, a million different reasons. And part of this is just the decline of labor and the left itself. So we really need to get that connection back. And so even though we've seen a growth in the left in the form of DSA and other groups, that disconnection is still there in different ways. I think, in certain local areas is not as bad as other areas, but, and I think this disconnection between what we're seeing is broadly working class people either bolting to the Republican Party and being, drawn in by appeals of Trump, or just not voting altogether. And really, most of them are just not voting. So the question is how to reconnect there. And, and we see it all the time. Back in that GM strike in 2018, we went out there and we were going out there as DSA supporting them, met many people that were pro-Trump at the time, even though they were very enthusiastic participants in the strike. I was in Langhorne, Pennsylvania on Saturday for the Kellogg strike. And definitely wouldn't say every worker there was a Trump supporter, but I did notice one person after their picket duty drove away and they had a Trump sticker. So the question is, what is going on here? There's people that clearly, when it comes to fighting for their own job and a certain aspect of solidarity, they understand it, and they're still getting swept up in appeals by people like Trump. And so these are the people we got to learn how to win back and win over. And this really explains a lot of the Democrats' problems. Is like, if you are attacking labor and moving jobs overseas, that's why, whereas they used to dominate the Midwest, they don't anymore. To me, it's kind of as simple as that. And so I think, and not to toot our own horn in Philly too hard, but I think for a while I was chair of our labor committee in Philadelphia DSA, and I think we've done a really good job of having a great close relationship with many local unions. And it's kind of grown out of many things over the years. And we reached a place where even some of these union leaders that they're not necessarily Bernie people, but they have no kind of hesitation about DSA because we've kind of built a strong relationship of being there for them. They know that we'll always be the first at a picket line and supporting them. And that's kind of created some interesting opportunities. So, for one example was when COVID broke out, there's the president of the Postal Workers Union in Philly. There I am there. And then over there is the Teamsters Local 623 president representing UPS workers. Wow, you have these teed up. AFSCME District Council 33.
Boom, boom, boom.
And so, we have an interest. So, for example, those last two people you showed, they are people that, that guy there and the one below, they recently won office in their union in the last year or 2 years. And these are people that we as DSA had been working closely with before they got into the office. So AFSCME District Council 33, right after COVID happened, our chapter worked with them. They were fighting for hazard pay and PPE before they were running for office. And then with the Teamsters, even further back, we were fighting with them when they were trying to get their contract. And so now that they're in office, there's a close relationship there between DSA and them. And that allows us to do stuff that some people are very surprised to see happening, that a unions like that really connected with a DSA chapter, but that kind of speaks to building those relationships over years. And I think also, like, for lack of a better word, like coming correct. And it's like, look, and some people act like it's a mystery of how we've built these relationships, but it's actually very basic. Like, look, work on the work that they're, uh, focused on, and be very focused on that. Don't come with like speaking like you're speaking a different language, or worried about saying all the wokest thing in the room. Like, none of that matters. It just comes down to focus on the issues that matter to them, and be useful. Yeah, be useful, provide resources in the ways you can. And so, when COVID hit, we had an initiative. We actually passed some really strong city level legislation around workplace safety and health. And, we got around 30 unions to sign on to this letter demanding this bill around, workers being able to take sick leave, and things like that related to COVID. And that kind of came together because of the relationships we built over the years. And then we use that going forward. So then for healthcare, some may remember Bernie Sanders was pushing what was called the Healthcare Emergency Guarantee Act, which would have temporarily expanded Medicare for the duration of COVID. Now, most of the Democrats were pushing COBRA subsidies, which were more expensive and actually covered way less people than would have been on Medicare. So we got 30 unions to sign on to a letter to our local congresspeople demanding the Healthcare Emergency Guarantee Act. And many of these unions were unions that are generally conservative, not right-wing conservative, but more moderate politically. And again, that came out of like, this is the same coalition that passed that workplace safety and health legislation. It kind of translated into that. And then out of that, we were able to do some political education for some of these unions about Medicare for all. It was kind of like the Healthcare Emergency Guarantee Act was like a gateway drug in a way to Medicare for all. And now we're working together on this labor notes. They call them troublemaker schools, where, these are local schools where local union activists get together. There's going to be workshops, education sessions. So I'm kind of bringing this up as like, and this is all kind of being done by sometimes DSA as an organization or just DSA people. And it speaks to, and this is all about this task of like getting the left and the labor movement back together. And I think the reason we've been successful, and I don't know how this is going to come off, I'm not some kind of right winger, but it's like, it has nothing to do with like trying to be the wokest person in the room or trying to talk about stuff that most people are just not thinking about. It's a very kind of more simple thing of like, being focused, I think, is one thing. We're not trying to do 30 campaigns at once, but focus on these things, being productive over the long term. It's taken about 4 or 5 years to get to this level in Philadelphia, which is a long time, but also not a long time. So it can be done. And I think that's kind of what we need to be thinking about, is how to have productive relationships with unions. And since you brought up, I think, postal banking, this is another great example. And I think, I feel like I'm kind of rambling, but this will be my last point.
Please,
please. I think this is important for me to lay this out, because I think sometimes, we always say on the left, well, like, we have to organize, which is true, but it's also, I can understand that there's people out there like, well, how, like, where do you even start? What does that mean? And this to me is an example of like, again, how you can develop a relationship over time. And it's also a good thing to think about for a non-electoral work. I'm not anti-electoral politics, but I think we have to be able to do productive work in between elections, or also in between kind of these heightened moments of movement activity. We got to be able to still move the ball forward. So I'll give an example, again, this all seems like a lifetime ago, but in the lead up to the presidential election, all of a sudden the post office, everyone was talking about. There was the threats to mail-in voting. There was the attacks by DeJoy. And I felt very validated. As you might know, I'm obsessed with the post office. I've been writing about it. And all of a sudden, everyone's talking about it. And so we, our DSA chapter kind of used that moment, and we organized a campaign around defending the post office in Philly, which took different forms. One of it was we had this vast network of people throughout the city, flyering their local post office, getting people to call in to DeJoy about what was going on. We organized some rallies, and we worked with the Postal Workers Union local in Philly throughout that whole process. So again, what that did is, brought us together in that campaign. So there was now this deep level of trust between that union and us. And now, and they're actually working through a contract as well. The Postal Workers Union, although those workers are banned legally from striking. Now, you can always break, there's the Great Postal Strike in 1970. They broke the law and just struck anyway. But their contract's up. But what I'm hoping, and I think there's prospects for doing this now, is that after they settle their contract, which will hopefully be soon, because again of that trust and relationships that have been built over these last few years, we can mount a campaign for postal banking. And this came in the news recently because, the Postal Workers Union has been campaigning on this for a while now, which would offer basic banking services at every post office. So instead of people needing to rely on payday loans and these things that essentially just get you into debt, you can take care of basic things at the post office. It would also bring in revenue to the post office. So, they were able to win pilot programs in 4 cities across the country. And I think this is a productive campaign that people, organizations like DSA can work with their local postal workers union to try and pressure whoever they need to pressure for a campaign for a pilot program in these cities. So I think we could actually start moving on this in Philadelphia, working with the union, in the near future. And it's not the most radical thing in the world. I mean, it's not as substantial as something like Medicare for all, but it is pretty substantial. And in many ways, I see this as like an anti-racist demand because it's in poor Black and brown communities where you see payday cash operations most prevalent. And again, it's totally predatory, totally preying on poor Black and brown people. So there's a post office in every zip code. So if people could go there for banking services, that would actually make a big difference in people's lives. But again, even more so than the immediate impact the reform would make is like, what is the coalition you're building in the process? So if we won that reform, not only is it good to win that reform, but now we have this even more solidified and consolidated relationship between a group like DSA and the Postal Workers Union to keep moving, working forward. And there's a lot of things that could come out of that. So then let's say then the next year, a DSA candidate wants to run for office, and now they can probably more reliably count on getting the endorsement of some of these unions you've worked with. And that's hard because a lot of these unions, unfortunately, will usually stick with incumbents or they're afraid to back challengers. But if you have a deeper relationship with them, if they've kind of been in battle with you, they could be a part of an electoral campaign. And, so it's kind of like one thing can lead to the next. So we have to kind of have a protracted way of looking at. Can't always just be one-off things, or we can't always go with what's hot at the moment. But if we kind of keep at it in a protracted way, these kind of coalitions can be built.
All right, Paul, this is absolutely fantastic. I'm so happy we have you on today. Hey, let me just circle back and ask. It seems like you're saying if someone's in my chat and they're wondering, what can they do? What can they do to improve their world? What can they do after watching my stream all day? I tell them about how bad the world is, and I try to show them good content for people like you. But we learned about how rough it is out there everywhere, and sometimes it's easy to feel helpless. Perhaps you're saying if people want to jump in, one of the ways they can help is to help build relationships in their community through these kinds of organizations. This is one pathway to do so, and building these relationships by sort of planting these seeds maybe and being there for folks within the working class to build solidarity to improve their material conditions and their lives. Is that too reductive?
Yeah, no, I mean, and it's like with these strikes, for example, you could go on Google very quickly and probably find the strike fund for John Deere workers, for Kellogg's workers. So, I mean, that's one thing you can bring out people to a picket line. And, and even if you might feel like you've never been to one and uncomfortable, I mean, it's extremely simple. Like you literally just go and the workers really appreciate it. They'll give you a sign. You can stand there, walk around, do what you want. But that would be really appreciated. You could bring food. And again, I think it should be fairly easy to find where it might be a local picket line with you. And, I hesitate to say just join an organization, any organization. I think, you should do your homework. And even, I will admit, I mean, DSA varies a lot depending on the area, so you should do your homework. But I do think there's value in being in some kind of organization to be able to do these kinds of things. And also realize, if an organization is not quite operating how you want it to, you do have agency to change it in different ways, which is hard. But I mean, all of this shit is hard. So that's kind of never really a total excuse. And yeah, in your workplace, if you're thinking about organizing it, I mean, just one, you have to be careful, even though companies are not supposed to fire you for organizing. They do it all the time, and they probably will. So be careful, but you might want to start thinking about what unions in the area could you reach out to. So if you reach out to them, they might have some interest to help you in the process. So yeah, I mean, there's plenty of different ways, and yeah, I think with some of these strikes, there's a very concrete thing of donate to the strike fund, try to boost it on social media, and I think especially if you can make it to a picket line, it really means a lot to workers when they have supporters doing that.
Awesome. A couple different concrete ways for viewers if they're thinking about what they could do if you've never had that thought process, if you've never gone through that. What could you do? There's a couple different examples. It's good stuff. Paul, I feel like maybe we're in the tail end here. I don't want to keep you too long. I want to respect your time. Of course, you do really good work. But let me just ask before we do start wrapping it up. Is there anything else like you really wanted to share with us? Because I'm truly fascinated. You can just wax poetic for as long as you like. I think I'm getting a lot out of this, and as is my chat too. So, yeah, like anything else that you want to share that you've been working on?
I'll say this, and this is kind of my hobby horse thing to say, and people that have read me and or follow what I say will have heard me before. And so I'm looking up something because I want to have some statistics on hand. But I've always, again, especially historically, but even now, I don't think a lot of people quite realize how important the labor movement has been to fighting racism and racial inequality. In the 30s and 40s, where there was the wave of labor organizing that kind of made the U.S. what it was for a long time. At those times, unions were kind of basically the only organizations that were doing integrated multiracial organizing, and a lot of them were doing explicit things like in the South in the 30s and 40s. Unions were really the only groups challenging the poll tax in an interracial way. Of course, you had groups like the NAACP and others, but mobilizing white people to, challenge the poll tax, challenge lynching, things like that. And I think especially today, the public sector has been, I would argue, like the literal single most important institution that has mitigated Black poverty. And Black workers are disproportionately in the public sector for a variety of reasons. Part of that is because, and this is one of the achievements of civil rights legislation in the 60s that is overlooked, is that by banning discrimination in federal employment, that allowed Black workers to have a much better shot in the public sector than the private sector. And as I mentioned before, as it stands today, 33% of the public sector is organized in a union. And so as it stands now, 21% of Black workers are in the public sector. So I know this is like dry statistics. So in other words, Black workers are disproportionately likely to be public sector workers related to their population. And these jobs are disproportionately unionized, have better job security, things like that. And I'll put out another statistic that's pretty incredible. On the whole, Black workers in the public sector make 25% more than their counterparts in the private sector. And again, it's not totally rocket science because it's like these are unionized, better pay, better benefits. So, I'm talking about teachers, postal workers, federal workers, and it's a very visible thing too. So in Philadelphia, which is a large Black population, I mean, you look around at your postal workers, sanitation workers, city workers, they are disproportionately Black and brown. And so, I kind of say that because I think actually one of the most important fights for racial justice that's overlooked is defending the public sector from austerity. So, whether someone is saying this or not, and whether they're a white or Black politician, if they're talking about cutting funds from the public sector and attacking public sector unions, to me, they are de facto attacking, racial equality. Again, whether they're meaning to or not, it's just a fact of life. And in many Black communities, like public sector work is the backbone of what they call the Black middle class. I would argue it's a slightly more secure working class, but that's a quibble. But what they call the Black middle class, more so than for white middle class people, it has been built on unions, especially public sector unions. So this idea, of taxing the rich to expand the public sector, to me, is very closely connected with racial justice, given some of these numbers I just listed. So I think that's something that, just should be aware of. And I think of that as a racial justice fight, even if it doesn't seem like it's about race.
I appreciate those stats. That 25%, I often like to say I'm not surprised, but my jaw is still on the floor. You know what I mean? It's such a red flag, so revealing. It's just so shameless. And I think that, what you're saying is that neoliberalism, the one of the threads of it being privatization of these kinds of unionized jobs is sort of like is sort of racist. It's racist. Just call it racist.
Right. Yeah. And I'll say, and this I might be getting a little bit more spicy here, but and again, I go back to a city like Philadelphia. It's kind of, we've heard there's a lot of discussion about so-called class reductionism and this and that, but it's been amazing in Philadelphia. And I've been active politically here for about 11 years in a pretty intense way. So gone to a lot of actions, a lot of events, and without failure, the most diverse action, they're not even diverse, meaning there's actually not many white people there, but the most diverse actions have always been labor events. Even the protests around police brutality. I mean, the ones on the summer of George Floyd, and, including, these are ones that I went to a lot, vast majority white. But the union actions, are, usually majority Black and brown. And I kind of say that as a word of caution as well, because I think some leftists have the idea of like, well, okay, the left is overwhelmingly white. If we want to connect with Black workers, we should take on stuff like criminal justice reform or police brutality. Like, that is the thing. I'm not saying that's not valuable work and it's not stuff that relates to Black and brown people. But again, I think if you're actually taking on some of these public sector fights, actually involves a much more diverse coalition, and kind of where more people are at immediately thinking about these things than some of these other things you might assume are Black and brown issues. But again, but when you think about it, it's not surprising because, if a city where Black people are disproportionately working class, it would make sense that the unions are going to be very diverse, again, as they are in a city like Philadelphia. So, yeah, I mean, again, it's just kind of a word of caution. I think some people go down the wrong track of being like, well, this is the issue that will get us to Black people, or whatever, however they frame it. And, I mean, some of the things that got the most traction, again, was like saving the post office, which has been a really critical institution for Black people. And this is something, it also kind of taps into even just anecdotal knowledge. So like, there are many Black people out there that they're not leftists, they're not political nerds, but they understand the post office is like very meaningful thing to them, because it's like, yeah, my father, that was the only job he could get, or that's how I got through college. Like, that's a very real, tangible thing to people. And I think those public sector fights kind of tap into that. I'll give an anecdote. We fighting with, AFSCME District Council 33 in Philadelphia. Again, they represent the blue collar municipal workforce. So most notably like sanitation workers, water department workers. So they had a big rally in the beginning of this summer in preparation for their contract fight. And this one politician got up, and I kind of hated to admit it, because let's just say she's not great on many issues, including related to like revenue to fund public services. But she got up there, and I got to say, she made the best speech, because what she did is she tapped into that kind of anecdotal knowledge about, we know as Black people that these are good jobs. And growing up, we always knew about, we want our child or our father or brother or sister to get a good job. And what that meant was a public sector union job. So it's a thing, like, it really is a thing that matters to people, and people are thinking about, even if they're not self-described socialists. So I think those are the kind of campaigns we should think about. I think that is what's going to build the coalition that we need.
All right, Paul. I appreciate those anecdotes. Hey, I think we're going to let you go in just a couple of minutes here.
Right.
I do want to say, by the way, this has been fantastic, really incredible, and I really appreciate you coming on in. I'm going to ask you in a moment again, how me and my chat can specifically help you and your projects. But what I'd like to do is let you know that earlier in the week, me and my chat were learning about and this is going to take a dive
right.
here, the 85 Move bombing in Philadelphia by the police department. I learned that the FBI gave them a bomb, and then it burned down 61 houses. It killed 6 children and 5 children and 6 adults, and it also burned down a bunch of houses. And that led us, we learned a lot about that, including the bones and everything. Oh my gosh, the bones. And then, we went down the rabbit hole, and we learned about Mumia Abu Jamal and his plight, and how we're fighting to free Mumia. I don't know. I just wanted to give you an opportunity to feel free to give us a couple quick thoughts on that. Otherwise, we'll ask you what else, how we can support your work.
Yeah, and I think to me one of the most interesting things about the Move bombing, which again, if people don't know, it'd be a little hard to exactly describe this group, but kind of like a Black nationalist, back to nature type of group. It was a little out there. There were a lot of Black neighbors that kind of were complaining about different things going on. And there actually was some things that have come out about people in the Move family, about essentially mistreatment and abuse they experienced. But so they had a few kind of altercations with the police. And ironically, Philadelphia's first Black mayor, Wilson Goode Jr., ordered the police to literally drop a bomb on the house. And so not only did the house explode, but a whole block of people, multiple blocks not even involved with Move, caught fire. So that was definitely, and that's been a kind of signature moment in Philadelphia history that
and they let it burn too. The fire department showed up, and the cops prevented them from putting it out. That's the part that made me go, okay.
Right. Yeah, and and to me, kind of zooming out, it just brings up this broader question of, the idea of Black faces in high places is not going to solve everything, clearly. And post, starting in the late 60s, and there's been these waves of the first Black mayors, the first Black politicians, city council members, and Philadelphia was part of that. Again, this was the first Black mayor, but kind of points to that's not going to solve every problem as it relates to different issues like police brutality. But yeah, so that's kind of continuing to be a cause. I think even nationally, a lot of people talk about Mumia Abu Jamal and freeing him in that case. So,
all right, Paul, Labor Paul, really appreciate you being with me today. Go ahead, and I want to let you know how the live streaming works. People come in and out, so maybe people weren't watching the beginning. Feel free to give yourself the big shout out again, what you do and where people can find you doing it. And additionally, if you can really lean into this time, how specifically can me and my community help you, Labor Paul?
Yeah, I think a lot of my work is on Jacobin, so I think boosting not just what I write on Jacobin, but others. Every day there's tons of great articles. Co-host on the Jacobin Show, which will air every Wednesday night. I try to do a Labor Paul section every week, although I think now I'm back to hosting every other week. So I think boosting content out there, again, we try to bring on a lot of people, local people in the labor movement, to give their perspective. And also, I don't write for them as frequently anymore, but Labor Notes, which I mentioned earlier, is a really great publication. They've been covering the issue of union democracy and what rank and file workers and unions are doing for years. So I think any chance to share that material is great. And yeah, so I think that's really it.
Awesome. Paul Prescod, thank you so much. You've been a truly wonderful guest. I'm so happy you were able to join us and share with us your time and your experiences. And I think this was an important conversation for me and my community, and I'll be reflecting on it and learning from it. But I think you've planted some good seeds, dude. Really good stuff. Really happy. Thank you again, Paul.
Right.
Have a good day and solidarity. All right.
All right. Solidarity.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Peace now. Thanks, bud. All right. Yes. Fuck yeah. God damn it. God damn it. God damn it. That was a good interview. Hey, YouTube. You're watching a clip from my Twitch channel, twitch.tv/iDanSimpson, where you can follow for free and subscribe for only $5 a month. Thanks for watching.